You ever hear about the Americans that went off and fought against the freedom flag during World War II? The group of Americans that sided with Germany. Yeah, they had a name. They were called the George Washington Legion. And guess what? They didn't exist. At least technically didn't. Sorta did, but didn't. It doesn't matter, we're talking about them. So, this story of how Americans went and fought for the Germans during World War II is part fact and part fiction. As we have discussed in previous episodes, the SS especially was pretty keen on recruiting new members from a pretty large brush, not only from occupied populace, but from active enemies as well. The Russians, the Danes, the Ukrainians, the French, Indian, Emus, and even British units were created under the Lightning banner. But what about from the Americans? The main way that the Germans would recruit men was via their existing POW camps, and there were plenty of Americans to choose from, especially after the battles of the Ardens Forest. However, even with a large pool to pull from, exceptionally few Americans would ever sign up to the so-called George Washington Legion. Yet the question has to be posed then, did any Americans actually fight for Germany during World War II? Before the start of the war, there was a fringe in the American population that had support for Germany. An American Nazi Party had even been formed, which would hold parades and marches all throughout America, sometimes to the tune of tens of thousands. This organization, known as the German American Bund, focused on Americans with German ancestry and talked about a combined American-German nationalism with the end goal of supporting Nazi Germany. Training camps for fighters would be opened across New England in the late 30s, as membership swelled to over 25,000. The Bund also published magazines, pamphlets, and posters relatively in style and contemporary of the Third Reich propaganda. Their influence would grow even as World War II started in Europe, though it would gradually decline due to federal investigation and the imprisonment of their Führer, that being Franz Julius Kühn. The group would continue to exist until December of 1941, when the US officially entered the war, and they immediately outlawed the Bund. Regardless, it is clear that sympathies of untold thousands of US residents lay with Germany at the outset of hostilities. Yet, did this influence over thousands result in any joining the Axis? A handful would. Most Americans living abroad would either return home at the onset of the war, or were interned when Hitler declared war against the United States. But joining after this declaration was an act of treason, and one such individual would have a well-documented act of treasonous defection, that being fighter pilot turned SS officer Martin Monti. Born in St. Louis in 1921, Monti's father was a Swiss-Italian who would emigrate to the United States while his mother was of German ancestry. He was raised in an environment described as fervently religious, strongly anti-communist, and laced with isolationist sentiments. By the 30s, he became an avid listener of clergyman Charles Cullen, a Detroit-based radio broadcaster who went on many tangents against communism, Jews, President Roosevelt, all while supporting Hitler's Third Reich and Mussolini's fascist Italy, ultimately likely where the ideological pull of fascism would catch hold. Nevertheless, Monti wouldn't originally enlist in the SS. Instead, he would enlist as an aviation cadet in the U.S. Air Forces in late November of 1942. He would become a qualified fighter pilot in the summer of 44, raising to the rank of second lieutenant, being qualified with the P-38 Lightning and the Bell Era Cobra. Monti would be attached to the American forces based out of Calcutta, India, being promoted to first lieutenant before the summer would come to a close. Yet Monti himself would have plans before the end of the year. Monti would take a leave of absence, hitch a ride from India to Cairo, caught a follow-on flight to Tripoli, and finally talked himself aboard a plane bound for Naples, by then in Allied hands. By October the 10th, Monti found himself at Pomigliano Airfield, whose units were tasked with repair and testing aircraft, before shipping them off to various combat sectors. Monti would see a Lockheed F-5E Lightning, the photo reconnaissance version of the P-38, in need of a test flight after repairs. He would steal the F-5E, flying north into German-controlled Italy and landing at Milan and surrendering. He managed to convince his captors that he was indeed an actual defector, and in November they sent him to Berlin, arranging for him to be enrolled in the SS Standard Jägers, a propaganda unit. He was originally assigned to be a radio broadcaster, but his utter lack of talent, as well as sparring with Axis Sally, another defector, resulted in him being pulled from the air after only a handful of broadcasts. Instead, he would be tasked with writing propaganda pamphlets for American prisoners of war in northern Italy. Monti was not involved in any fighting, but as he saw the end of the war approaching, he would desert the SS and surrender to the Americans in Italy. When he surrendered, he was still wearing his SS officer's uniform, claiming that it had been given to him by local partisans so that he could escape to the American lines. Now, of course, the local commander still remembered that Monti had stolen the F-5E the previous year, and while he tried to paint it as him going rogue to fight the Germans on his own, no one was exceptionally buying it. He would be court-martialed in 1946, sentenced to 15 years hard labor for desertion and the stealing of an aircraft. President Truman would pardon Monti in 1947 on the condition that he actually re-enlisted in the U.S. Air Force as a private, and by the time of Monti's honorable discharge in 1948, he would have been promoted to the rank of sergeant. Within minutes of his discharge, though, he would be arrested by the FBI on 21 counts of treason for his service in the SS. Monti would plead guilty to all counts, getting 25 years behind bars and a $10,000 fine. He would be paroled from Leavenworth in 1960, moving back to his hometown in Missouri, where all activity from him would go dark until his death in September of 2000. With the tale of the American SS defector ending with relative obscurity. Be sure to like the video and subscribe to my channel. It costs you nothing, and I wish you all the best.